Hi everyone, I'm Andrew Locke. Welcome to another episode of Gaffer in Gear. In today's episode, we're reviewing the Aputure Lightstorm 600C Pro, which is their full color 600 watt COB Bowen Mount unit. In this episode, we're also going to take a look at all the available hard light modifiers and give you all the stats on those. And we're also going to see how the unit performs over CRMX lumen radio. Alright, so let's start off with how much it costs and what you get for your money. So it sells for about 2,700 US dollars. That's about 3,700 Australian dollars. So it comes in a heavy duty bag, of course. Now the bag has wheels at one end and at the top it has a pull out handle. Right, so very convenient. Now everything fits quite snug into the bag. All right, so let's start having a look at the contents. So you get this, what's this thing called? The lightning clamp. So the lightning clamp is what connects the controller to the light stand. Now this has a big enough jaw that it will fit a large stand like a wind-up stand. All right, next thing is you get a power cable, of course. So it's Nutrix connector at one end and your regional connector at the other, and it's a good length. Next is the head lead. So this connects the light to the controller. This is 7.5 meters long, so that's more than long enough to get to the top of your tallest stand. Next is the 600 series hyper reflector. All right, so I haven't been a fan of these in the past, but this actually works pretty well with the 600C because the 600C has a larger COB area. This doesn't give you the hotspot that it's notorious for having with the 600D and the 600X. You get the light, of course. Now the light comes with a red cap. Now the front of the light here has a diffused area, so that's where all the LED emitters get mixed together to give you a single point light source, so you can use it as a hard light. Now the light is weather resistant. And you also get the controller, which is also weather resistant. All right, so let's go through the pros and cons, and we'll do the cons first to get those out of the way. And I've only really got 3 cons. Now, the first con is to do with the F10 Fresnel here. So if you own a 600D or a 600X and you've got an F10 Fresnel for it, you don't need me to tell you that it's an absolute hero. Now here's the problem, the F10 is not optimized for a COB that's this big. Now it does perform very well optically, so it does do nice barn door cuts and it gives you reasonable shadows. But here's the thing, you don't get the light level that you're probably anticipating. So with the 600D with the F10, it's almost as bright as a 2.5K HMI Fresnel, just to give you something to compare it to. But on this light, it only comes in at about the equivalent of a 575 HMI Fresnel. So that's about half as bright as I was hoping this would be. But again, it all comes down to perspective. If you've never used this Fresnel on a 600D or a 600X, you would probably be very impressed with how it performs on the 600C. Now the next negative is a temporary one, and that is you can't currently buy any hard light modifiers for this that are optimized for this size COB. Now Aputure have given me permission to let you know something today. They are working on a projection mount. Now that projection mount is going to be optically optimized for this unit, but also for the 1200D, because this light and the 1200D have the same size COB. So this unit is optically optimized for the 1200's hyper reflector kit. Now this hyper reflector kit isn't available as a separate purchase yet, but it will be soon. Now the next negative is a possible negative because I can't prove it. And also if I could prove it, it's probably only going to affect less than 1% of you. So here's what I found in the testing. If I turn the light up full blast and I take a photo with a very high speed shutter, and by high speed I mean 1/17,760th of a second, I can see flicker. Alright, so with an incredibly high speed shutter we can catch flicker in this light, but what does that mean in terms of reality? Well, I don't 100% know for certain, but based on experience, this is what I found in the past with lights that have this much flicker when I take a photo like this. I would be more than happy to trust it to be flicker free at say 200 frames per second. But if I was doing a high speed shoot with a Phantom at about 1000 frames per second, I reckon this would give me some problems. All right, so let's start going through some of the pros now. Okay, so the first pro is it's weather resistant. The second pro for me is it's got built-in CRMX lumen radio and integrated 16-bit dimmers, so you get very smooth dimming. None of this flickering crap that you can get on other lights, particularly when you're very low on the dimmers. The light has 22 DMX profiles, and you can access those over 5-pin DMX, lumen radio, or Ethernet. The user interface is awesome, particularly if you're in complex modes like gels. You can see what's going on. In simple modes like CCT, you've got all your text information, but you've also got a visual representation of where the light settings are. When you're selecting an effect, each effect is symbolized by an icon, so it makes it really easy to find what you're looking for. The menu system is really easy to navigate. Even things like the DMX menu are very straightforward. You can easily select and see what your DMX profiles are. The next plus for this light is it has an advanced HSI mode. Now, there's nothing new about that. Advanced HSI modes have been around for some time, but here's the thing. With the vast majority of advanced HSI modes, you can only operate it over DMX. You can't operate it manually. Now, that's not the case here because of the new user interface. So what does an advanced HSI mode let you do? Well, in a normal HSI mode, you can take your white light, which is usually 6,500 Kelvin, which is what we've got here, and then you can saturate a color in over the top of it. But what if you don't want this as your color base? Well, that's where an advanced HSI mode comes into play. So we can change our Kelvin here. So let's put in 3,200 Kelvin. And now we can saturate in a color over the top of that. All right, so let's talk about the pros that have taken me by surprise. All right, so this thing has quite an extensive CCT range, 10,000 Kelvin all the way down to 2,300 Kelvin with plus minus green. Now here's the thing I wasn't expecting. Because this unit is RGBWW and it doesn't have an amber emitter, I was expecting the Kelvin right down at the bottom, 2,300, to be, well, crap. But much to my surprise, it's come in with a TM30 color vector score of 95%. And here is the spectrum distribution. That's very healthy. I did not expect a light that doesn't have an amber emitter to give me good rich color render down at a low Kelvin. Now the next pro is only really a pro if you're comparing this light to other lights in this size with this sort of firepower that are full color gamut, and that is the beam spread. So this light has a tremendous beam spread that you'd expect from a normal Bowen Mount light. So as you can see, it's illuminating my hand from the side here. So this light would have no problem illuminating something like a lantern or a softbox modifier. Now where this has come in as an unexpected pro for me was on a shoot in Chinatown. We had nowhere to park and we had 7 exterior locations to shoot that night. So we had to lug everything around by trolley. Now we walked 1.2 kilometers that night according to Google Maps. So we wanted a light in the kit that could light a large area like a background, give us a full saturated color. But here's the problem we had. We didn't want to lug around a heavy panel light. We didn't want something that took up a lot of space on the trolleys. And we figured we needed about 600 watt of light. This thing fitted the bill perfectly. So this is an example of one of the setups. We had this beautiful yellow tree and we really wanted to show the color of the leaves. So in order to get them to stand out, we decided to put an opposing color on the wall behind. After all, it's Chinatown. You can use bright red colors and no one's going to notice. Now in this setup here, the 600C is behind the bins and there's only about 4 meters to the wall. So it actually did deliver quite a huge spread. Now we do have some other lights throwing colors around. They're Felix lights. And they're supplying all the purples. And that is our first AD hiding behind the statue there, trying to keep out of shot. The next plus is you can run it off V-mount batteries. You can use your 14.4s or 14.8 volts or your 26 volt batteries. Now here's the thing, you are limited to 50% brightness. Now in the menu system, you can override that limitation. Now I've played with this a few times where I've needed a bit more power, and with my 26 volt batteries, I've pushed it to about 70% for a short amount of time, so it has come in handy. Now here's the thing I'm going to give you a bit of a cautious warning about. If you are hoping that in the future somebody will make a battery that will run this at 100% brightness, and the battery technology will probably get to that stage, what you've got to bear in mind is a 26 volt battery when it's almost flat is closer to 20 volts. So you'll be pulling about 18 amps over these pins. And that's probably hot enough to start melting the plastic that's around them. All right, now the next pro for this, or the last pro, is you can use this as a battery charger. So you can charge your 14.4s and your 14.8s, and you can charge your 26 volt V mounts. You can have a 14.4 on one side and a 26 volt on the other. It will charge them both simultaneously. Now, I have to eat some humble pie here. In a previous episode, I made the prediction that I will never use the charging feature, and it has saved my life more times than I care to admit, especially when I'm working away from home and I realize that I've left my chargers in the workshop. Okay, so I'm going to do a very nerdy chat for just a quick minute about how this unit is calibrated. Now, usually when I'm testing a Bowen Mount light like this, I will do all of my readings, all of my averages and all that stuff. I will take those with no modifier on the front. Now, that's what I did with this unit, and I was quite surprised at how far out the average kelvins were. Now, here's the thing I was thinking when I was having a look and trying to figure out why this was. I noticed that on the edge of the beam, so when I'm talking about the edge, I mean right on the very edge of the beam, so we're talking hitting the ceiling here and at my toes down here, that the light has a little bit of color fraying on it. So yeah, it's a little bit cooler on those outer edges. So I thought, how's that going to react with a dish when you mix the center values with that fraying on the edge? How's that all going to work? So when I popped the dishes on and then did a whole series of meter readings, I discovered that the light is actually calibrated to work with the dishes. So all of that light on the edge that is a lower Kelvin was hitting the dish and mixing with the light that was a higher Kelvin and giving me very accurate target values, typically within 50 Kelvin of the target value dialed in, which is quite impressive. So the reason I'm pointing that out is you have a lot of dish options with this light. So you've got the hyper reflector that it comes with, and you've got these the dish series that comes with the 1200 watt daylight version. So you've got a lot of dish options for this. Not only is this light optimized for those dishes in terms of the size of the COB, but the brains of the light have been programmed to be optimized in terms of your CCT and your white points when using the light with the hyper reflectors. Now, I've collected a lot of data for this episode, but to make your life a lot easier, what I've decided to do is get every hard light modifier that I've currently got that fits this light, and I'm going to go through them in terms of the most brightest to the least brightest modifier to help you figure out which attachment is best to put on for the circumstance that you're going to be in. All right, so all of these measurements are at a distance of 3 meters, and in terms of the f-stop measurements, they're taken at 400 ISO. All right, so the brightest attachment by far is the Aputure narrow dish. So this is the one that's sold currently with the 1200 daylight unit, and this will be available as an optional extra in a short time. All right, so this came in at 17,900 lux. That is a lot of firepower for a 600 watt light. Now, the next brightest unit to put on the front is the F10 Fresnel in full spot. Okay, so that's important to note, in full spot like it is here. Now, the thing to have a look at here is the figures. Okay, so there's a huge difference in light output between the spot dish and the F10 in full spot. The F10 in full spot comes in at 8,920 lux. That's a huge difference, or a huge drop down from the reflector, because the F10 Fresnel isn't optimized to work with this light. Okay, the next brightest attachment is the medium dish that is sold with the 1200 series. So this one comes in at 5,860 lux, so that's the next brightest. The next brightest thing after that is the standard LS60 series hyper reflector, LS600 series hyper reflector. This is the reflector that's sold standard with the kit. So as you can see, it's sitting in the middle of everything. So this is the smart option if you can only pack one reflector. Okay, so you do get a nice compromise of firepower to spread. So this one came in at 4,900 lux at 3 meters. Now, the next brightest thing is the wide dish that's sold in the 1200 kit. or the 1200 reflector kit. So this thing comes in at 3,570 lux. Now for me personally, if I'm doing a flood, I'd be happy to sacrifice that little bit of light level and use this over the previous reflector. Now here's where optimization comes into play. The F10 is not optimized for this light, and as a result, this is the next brightest attachment. So this comes in at 3,530 lux. So this thing's a long way from the top of the pile. That's the difference that optimization makes. All right, so this thing comes in at 3,530 lux. So that's probably a useless figure. So let's give you some comparisons. If you put this on the front of the light, it only increases the light level by 59%. Now, if you're somebody that owns the F10, let's give you some other comparisons. It comes in at 35% the brightness of having the F10 on the 600D, so only 35% the brightness. And if you're used to running this on the 600X, it comes in at 47% the brightness of having this fixture on the 600X. So that's a very disappointing figure for me. So this is the first time that I have a full color light, and it's not going to be replacing my bicolor lights, because I love using the 600Xs with the F10 Fresnel. It's a great combination. All right, the next brightest option for you is to have the light with no modifier on it, okay? And then the least brightest option is the spotlight mount with the 36-degree lens. So you actually lose light level going through this. All right, let's take a closer look at some of these attachments. All right, let's start off by having a look at the hyper reflector that is sold standard with the light. And I know what you're thinking. If you've got the 600D or the 600X, you probably hate this reflector because it's got a massive hotspot that makes this almost unusable. But that's not the case with the 600C. Because the 600C has a larger COB area, you don't get that hotspot. Now the difference between the center of the beam and over here is only 0.1 of an f-stop, and that is regardless of what CCT or color you have selected. So as you can see, the LS600 series hyperreflector has a more even beam and a nicer drop-off than it did on the 600D and the 600X. Now let's take a look at the 1200 series wide reflector. And while it doesn't have the output of the 600 series reflector, it has a wider beam angle and a way more even beam. This would be my choice if I wanted a floodlight. Now let's take a look at the 1200 series medium reflector. And at first glance, this appears to have a similar beam angle to the 600 series hyperreflector, but it outputs more light level. And finally, the 1200 series spot reflector, or as I call it, the cannon. This definitely has a hot spot, but an immense amount of light. Now, just to give it a practical test, I decided to terrorize my neighborhood with the 600C and this spot reflector. As you can see from across the road, it gives a large spread with a massive amount of firepower. Here I'm using it to simulate a sodium vapor street light. And just for some giggles, I'm throwing some colour around as well. Let's see how it optically performs with the F10 Fresnel. The beam on the F10 in flood seems wider than it is on the 600D and the 600X. And it also appears to be more even. The barn door cuts are very acceptable. Even with coloured light. But it doesn't spot up as much as it does on the 600D or the 600X. Now the shadow qualities seem okay, but they're definitely not as sharp as with the 600D and with the 600X. Now let's have a look at how this thing goes with the F10 Barn Doors and the black dish. So the idea here is that you've only got one light source. You don't have a silver dish giving you multiple reflections. So as you can see, you do get good barn door cuts, but of course you can't flood spot. Next, I tried the spotlight mount, and it is worth emphasizing again that Aputure are working on a spotlight mount that is calibrated for this light and the 1200. Now, if you're looking to create a colored follow spot effect, this combination works pretty good. If you're looking to do colored slashes with the blades, it also works pretty good. However, the blacks in gobo projections are very milky. And when testing a linear gobo pattern, you can see that the blacks are also inconsistent. Next, I tried a circular pattern, and this is the best I could get it into focus. But the one plus this unit has is if you like out of focus patterns, you've got a massive defocusing range. Alright, so let's start testing the DMX. Now this unit has a built-in TMO2 receiver transmitter. It also has 22 DMX profiles. So you've got 8-bit, 16-bit, your basic modes, things like HSI CCT crossover modes, XY coordinate modes, and even an ultimate mode. So at the moment, I'm running it in a CCT HSI crossover mode. So I can dial in from 10,000 Kelvin all the way down to 2,300 Kelvin, add a plus minus green, and then crossfade in a color hue. All right, let's take a look. The purpose of this test is to see how the light responds to DMX cues. The light is running off an 8-bit profile and receiving its commands over CRMX. To give you something to compare it to, I have a Titan tube that is also running over CRMX. Both lights will be receiving their commands at the same time. Let's start off with instant on-off commands. Now let's have a look at automated 5-second fades. Now let's take a look at 2.5-second automated fades. Now let's take a look at 1-second automated fades. Now let's take a look at half-second automated fades. Now let's switch the CCT between 5,600 Kelvin and 3,200 Kelvin. Now let's look at 5-second automated CCT changeovers. Now let's take a look at 2.5-second automated CCT changeovers. Now let's take a look at 1-second automated CCT changeovers. Now let's take a look at half-second automated CCT changeovers. Now let's have a look at instant scene changes to a color. Now let's take a look at a 5-second automated changeover to a color. Now let's do the same thing with a 2.5 second cue. Now let's do the same thing with a 1 second automated cue. And the same thing again, this time with a 1/2 second automated cue. Now let's have a look through all of the data I've collected with this light and all the different modifiers. Now just a reminder that this section is chaptered, so you can go to the index below and find what it is you're specifically looking for. Let's start off with AC power draw. After several days of testing, the maximum power draw recorded was 752.9 watt. At 3200 Kelvin, I measured 711 watt, and at 5600 Kelvin, I measured 717 watt. Now let's take a look at the brightness. The measurements were taken with the meter set to 400 ISO with a 1/50th of a second shutter speed at 25 frames per second. These are the results for the light at 1 meter with no modifier. These are the results with the light at a distance of 3 meters with no modifier. These are the results with the light at a distance of 3 meters with the supplied hyperreflector. These are the results of the light at 3 meters with the optional F10 Fresnel in full flood. These are the results with the light at 3 meters with the optional F10 Fresnel in full spot. These are the results at a distance of 3 meters with the spotlight mount with the 36-degree barrel. Now let's have a look at the brightness results with all of the different hyperreflectors. These are the brightness results at a distance of 3 meters with the flood hyperreflector. These are the results at a distance of 3 meters with the medium hyperreflector. And these are the results at a distance of 3 meters with the spot hyperreflector. Now let's take a look at the stats for the light with no modifier attached, but do bear in mind that it is calibrated to work with the hyperreflectors. When I dialed in 2300 Kelvin, I got 2375. The TM30 colour vector scores were 95% average colour accuracy with an average 101% colour saturation. With the CRI scores, R11 and R12 were below 90. Here is the spectrum distribution. And the white point came in with a delta UV of minus 0.0004, which puts the white point almost on the Planckian curve. When I dialed in 3200 Kelvin, I got 3257 with an SSI of 85. The TM30 colour vector scores were 96% average colour accuracy with an average 102% colour saturation. With the CRI scores, only R12 was below 90. Here is the spectrum distribution. And the white point came in with a delta UV of minus 0.0013, which makes the light ever so slightly magenta to roughly the equivalent of a 1/16th correction gel. When I dialed in 4400 Kelvin, I got 4540. The TM30 colour vector scores were 94% average colour accuracy with an average 102% colour saturation. Here are the CRI scores, and only R12 was below 90. Here is the spectrum distribution. And the light came in slightly magenta with a delta UV of minus 0.0014, which is roughly the equivalent of a 1/16th correction gel from the Planckian curve. When I dialed in 5600 Kelvin, I got 5890 with an SSI of 73. The TM30 colour vector results were 94% average colour accuracy with an average 102% colour saturation. Here are the CRI scores, and only R12 is below 90. Here is the spectrum distribution, and the white point came in with a delta UV of plus 0.0005, which places the white point very close to the Planckian curve, but off the daylight curve towards magenta by about a 1/8 correction gel. When I dialed in 10,000 Kelvin, I got 9,907. The TM30 colour vector results were 90% average colour accuracy with an average 100% colour saturation. Here are the CRI scores. R3, R6, R9, R10 and R12 are all below 90. Here is the spectrum distribution, and the white point came in with a delta UV of plus 0.0005. With the HSI colour vectors, red, which should be 0, was smack on. Green, which should be 120 degrees, came in at 117. Blue, which should be 240, came in at 241. Yellow, which should be 60, came in very close at 57. However, I would suggest dialing in 43. Cyan, which should be 180, was also very close at 183. And magenta, which should be 300 degrees, came in at 294. Now let's take a look at how these things are optimized to work with the hyperreflectors. When I dialed in 2300 Kelvin, I got 2333. The TM30 colour vector results were 95% average colour accuracy with an average 101% colour saturation. Here are the CRI scores, and only R11 was below 90. Here is the spectrum distribution, and the white point was incredibly accurate with a delta UV of plus 0.0001. When I dialed in 3200 Kelvin, I got 3232 with an SSI score of 86. The TM30 colour vector results were 96% average colour accuracy with an average 101% colour saturation. Here are the CRI scores, and only R12 is below 90. This is the spectrum distribution, and the white point was very accurate with a delta UV of plus 0.0005. When I dialed in 4400 Kelvin, I got 4450. The TM30 colour vector results were 94% average colour accuracy with an average 101% colour saturation. Here are the CRI scores, and only R12 is below 90. This is the spectrum distribution, and the white point was very accurate with a delta UV of plus 0.0008. When I dialed in 5600 Kelvin, I got 5660 with an SSI score of 74. TM30 colour vector results were 94% average colour accuracy with an average 101% colour saturation. Here are the CRI results, and only R12 is below 90. This is the spectrum distribution, and the white point came in with a delta UV of plus 0.0016, which splits it between the Planckian curve and the daylight curve. When I dialed in the top Kelvin of 10,000 Kelvin, I got 9,915. The TM30 colour vector results were 90% average colour accuracy with an average 100% colour saturation. Here are the CRI scores. Here is the spectrum distribution, and the white point came in with a delta UV of plus 0.0013. In the HSI mode, red, which should be 0 degrees, came in at 1 degree. Green, which should be 120 degrees, came in at 117 degrees. Blue, which should be 240 degrees, came in at 241. Yellow, which should be 60 degrees, came in very close at 62. However, I would recommend setting 43 if you want a decent looking yellow. Cyan, which should be 180 degrees, was very close at 182. And magenta, which should be 300 degrees, came in at 291. Let's take a look at the readings I got with the F10 Fresnel. When I dialed in 2300 Kelvin, I got 2349. The TM30 colour vector results were 95% average colour accuracy with an average 101% colour saturation. Here are the CRI results. R11 and R12 were below 90. Here is the spectrum distribution, and the white point was very accurate with a delta UV of minus 0.0006. When I dialed in 3200 Kelvin, I got 3241 with an SSI score of 85. The TM30 colour vector results came in with a 95% average colour accuracy with an average 101% colour saturation. Here are the CRI results, and only R12 is below 90. Here is the spectrum distribution, and the white point was very accurate with a delta UV of minus 0.0009. When I dialed in 4400 Kelvin, I got 4505. The TM30 colour vector results were 94% average colour accuracy with an average 101% colour saturation. Here are the CRI results, and only R12 is below 90. This is the spectrum distribution, and the white point was very accurate with a delta UV of minus 0.0007. When I dialed in 5600 Kelvin, I got 5784 with an SSI score of 73. The TM30 colour vector results were 94% average colour accuracy with an average 101% colour saturation. With the CRI scores, only R12 was below 90. This is the spectrum distribution, and the white point came in with a delta UV of plus 0.0006, which puts the white point very close to the Planckian curve, but below the daylight curve towards magenta by roughly the equivalent of a 1/8 correction gel. When I dialed in the top Kelvin of 10,000 Kelvin, I got 10,377. The TM30 colour vector results were 90% average colour accuracy with an average 100% colour saturation. But take a close look at the graphic because the scores don't really indicate what's going on. Here are the CRI results. R3, R6, R10 and R12 are all below 90. Here is the spectrum distribution, and the white point was smack on the Planckian curve with a delta UV of 0. With the HSI colour vectors, red was smack on at 0 degrees, green, which should be 120 degrees, came in at 117, blue, which should be 240, came in at 241, yellow, which should be 60, came in at 72, cyan was smack on at 180, and magenta, which should be 300 degrees, came in at 284. Well, that's another gear review done. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope I've given you all the information that you need to know about this light. Now, I don't know when I'm going to have the next episode of Gaffer and Gear ready. I've got a very busy work schedule over the next 2 weeks, but until I see you next, take care, and please look after each other on set.